Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Museums as an Ecosystem, From Engagement to Revenue, How Museums Turn Content into Sustainable Growth. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We are excited to have leaders, operators, and changemakers from across the museum community with us. My name is David, and I'll be your moderator today. I am part of the team at Giard, an all-in-one CRM built specifically for museums and cultural institutions. In today's session, we'll explore a simple but powerful idea. Your museum's greatest untapped asset may not be a new campaign or major donor, but the relationship already forming around your content through exhibits, programs, and everyday engagement. Together, we'll look at how moving beyond siloed thinking toward a more connected ecosystem can help you turn those relationships into deeper engagement, stronger alignment across teams, and ultimately sustainable revenue growth. I am thrilled to be joined today by our guests, Erica Wall and Ray Giard. Erica is an educator, curator, and arts administrator, serving as the director of the Lunder Institute of American Art at the Colby College Museum of Art. She oversees a nationally recognized fellowship program and a museum partnership initiative, as well as an interdisciplinary audio archive on JSTOR. Previously, she held leadership roles at MoCA, Los Angeles, the J. Paul Getty Center, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And Ray comes from the Smithsonian Institute, the Carnegie Museums. Ray brings a practitioner's perspective on how museums translate content and engagement into sustainable revenue and long-term philanthropic relationships. With deep experience and advancement in operations, Ray understands what it takes to build the case for major gifts, align internal teams, and navigate organizational dynamics that ultimately drive institutional growth. Erica and Ray, we are grateful to have you both with us today, and I will turn things over to you to introduce yourself in your own words to help frame today's conversation around what museums as an ecosystem means to you. Before we begin, though, here are a few quick housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all registrants after the webinar. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation to avoid background noise. We encourage questions through the session. Please use the Q&A or chat, and we will address as many as possible during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. This is intended to be a practical and candid conversation, not a sales presentation. Please respect and be respectful of differing perspectives and experiences as institutions are at different stages of their operational journey. With that, Ray, Erica, thank you again for joining us. Let's begin.
So the traditional model, why silos create friction. So looking at this slide, the first question will be for Ray. From your experience, which department is most disconnected from content planning, and what does that look like day to day for you?
I think that question depends on both the size of the institution and also the priorities of the institution. So, I've worked with museums where marketing initiatives were first and foremost. And so, they received information maybe a little bit further in advance than some other departments. And departments like programming, for example, took a back seat. I've also worked in institutions where, programming and development were absolutely first and foremost. And, maybe marketing, for example, or education lagged behind. So I think it really depends on, how a museum wants to engage. Are they wanting a really big digital presence? Are they wanting a lot of people to attend, their programs, et cetera, and what their community partnerships look like with, local schools? So I think there are a lot of answers to that question, and it really is always going to boil down to what the goals of the institution are.
Amazing. So the slide notes that nothing really happens until content comes together. Can you share a real life example where delayed content coordination created a missed opportunity? And I can open that up to you as well, Erica, because I'm sure there's you probably have some nuggets as well on that front. But I'll start with you, Ray, though. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So, one example comes to mind of we knew that we were going to have a temporary exhibition. Really, it was really small. It was not more than really like a smaller gallery. So this is not a massive exhibition, but it's, an example of how sometimes, the smaller initiatives can get lost in a bigger picture. Um, but it was a smaller temporary exhibition that was really, really ripe for programming, like really interactive, a lot of opportunities for, various segments of the museum's audience to participate. But it got lost in communication about a much larger show that was coming down the pike. So, the programs team, very professional, were able to roll out and adjust. They were able to adjust their schedule, first of all, to allow for additional programming to reflect that this show was going to be happening. Um, but it gave them enough time to repurpose some programs, maybe not enough time to advertise those programs appropriately, get them on the website and any printed materials. And it didn't really allow for enough time to create something original or maybe include some partners that would have been really valuable to that experience. So, yeah, that's the first one that springs to mind for me. This was many years ago, I will say, but I still remember it.
How about you, Erica? Anything that pops in that may, yeah, kind of in the same line? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the overall kind of looking at it more broadly, I mean, I think there are lots of different examples, but when I think in my mind, you know, I think there are a lot of times where the timelines in terms of preparation and development of program don't align with those that are going to be promoting or communicating, right? So that's the very crux of it. And I think, most examples, and when I hear raise, is to just keep in mind and to remember as a kind of prompt that there are different timelines happening simultaneously. So the real question is, how does something not get lost? Or how do we align things that will open simultaneously, whether it be an exhibition? So that means with that exhibition, there are also numerous programs for each. Is one going to be compromised, or do we figure out a way that one maybe segues into the other or highlights the other because of, that versus having to choose, as Ray described, like at the end, okay, well, let's just try this and then hope that we don't lose something. And I could say from, many years in education, even when you think you're on the same timeline, when it comes for the request for marketing material, you often think, well, I thought you said I had another week. I thought you said, so I think I grapple with one particular example, but I think about in my mind, and I can hear through Ray, like, what is it that causes that? And it's, which obviously we're here to talk about. There are simultaneous timelines that are very different, but also the same because they have different things that need to take place. But the communication internally may lack alignment. So hence externally the alignment is off too. But I would say most examples would be what Ray described. It's the programming and the exhibition in alignment.
Amazing. Okay. That's, yeah, great insight. Love it. So kind of moving forward, went the other way. Sorry. Content as the connector, moving to the next one, how museums typically are structured. From your perspective, Ray, what is the value of shifting from thinking in terms of silos to thinking in terms of ecosystem?
Well, I think Erica really hit on that in her last answer. So when
Yeah.
you are thinking of the museum ecosystem, it's so tempting to say, well, the exhibition schedule is very neatly charted out. And we know that development has very specific cycles throughout the year. And we know that marketing is trying to keep up with all of us. And we know, so we know that there are all of these different calendars in play. And I think, there's a lot of opportunity to align them, but if you stay in that silo and you are just concerned and inflexible, I'm sure many of us have worked with, colleagues who mean well but are not flexible about those schedules. And so that can cause a lot of friction or lost opportunities. And I
Yeah.
think ultimately, if there is a plasticity around our own timelines and understanding, like, there are certain things that you just have to be a little bit forgiving about. That goes a long way.
Yeah, and so when you're thinking in terms of that, because like kind of going into it a little bit deeper, um, how could you like help leadership kind of move away from the silo, like with metrics? Like how could you help them kind of move away from that thinking with shared goals and more towards like shared goals across different teams? And I'll open this up to both
Right.
Erica and Ray. Like, yeah, so
Mhm.
just your thoughts on that. Yeah.
I think reporting helps a lot with that. So, you know, finance usually has some form of reporting that they do. Of course, anyone in programming, education, et cetera, they have certain metrics that they look to. Advancement certainly has certain metrics, et cetera. And we report on those often separately, not together, until we have to do maybe an impact report or an annual report. But even then, we're supplying that information separately. So I think there is a lot to be said for the ability to see how all of those are moving together and say, oh, hey, when we did this new thing in marketing, that really drove attendance to these gallery talks, or it really drove attendance, you know, to whatever it may be, whatever program it may be. Then you're able to get a really holistic view of how your internal workings, as it were, are really impacting the audiences that you're hoping to serve. I hate to say reporting is an answer, but I do think that that is, one key area where it just allows you to put numbers to it instead of maybe how you feel about how something's going.
I think that's a really important insight and aspect of the way in which, if we're talking about this ecosystem, how things work. I mean, it truly is. What does the structure assume the outcome will be if we function in this way? And I think a lot of times what we keep hearing over and over, I think why the silo happens is that everybody is working simultaneously towards this outcome, but I don't think everybody really has a good sense because there isn't as much intersection as there could be around the process for each, whether it be department or aspect, what their timelines are based on what their outcome is, and that all of these outcomes lead to the big exhibition, the big, and I think really respecting the simultaneous nature of it, but also respecting the outcome that each of these sort of departments within a museum are working toward. But I think to Ray's point about reporting and what you're asking, David, about leadership is leadership can support, I think, a greater functioning by illuminating more of where these places intersect and how they support one another versus the focus on what the outcome needs to be, right? Because we all have the same idea, but illuminating what it is those overlaps are so that each of these entities can better understand process and think about the simultaneous nature of timelines, but also really think about where we all overlap and intersect versus you bring yours to the table, then you bring yours, and then when it's all on the table, we'll build it then. What I forget what
Yeah.
that movie, the Apollo 13, where they
Yeah,
have
yeah,
them, it's like
yeah.
you have the brain trust, you have the knowledge.
Yeah.
It takes a problem in order for everybody to come together where you feel like maybe, I think as Ray's saying, like, how do we step back and then create this structure that already acknowledges and illuminates it, also even maybe helps us to think about potential pitfalls, gaps, blind spots so that we can address them.
Amazing. Okay. So moving on to just to keep this moving forward, engagement to revenue.
Mhm.
Um, this question is more for Erica. With engaging content, before they ever become donors, can you walk through a specific example of where like the journey played out successfully for you? Like any, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to I think what Ray was just saying, right? The sharing of information, reporting, whether it's internal or external, is critical. And for it to be clear and concise so that people can actually absorb it. And I will say, whether I'm explaining a program that we are doing in the institute internally within the museum or externally to those within our network in the field, I think there's a real there is a benefit from doing that consistently and always. So I think the best example I can give where you kind of take people through, sharing just so I have this practice of check-ins with people within the network in the field ongoing, people that I've known for many years, people that I've just met, people that have, been recommended to me because of some sort of intersection or alignment in our work. And you just never know who it is you're sharing your information with or talking to. It may be at one point a colleague, but you don't know who that colleague is representing in terms of a donor, a collector, an institution, a foundation. So you're really always sharing, not because you're trying to see what you can cast out in your net and bring in, but you're
right.
sharing so that people know what's going on. And, I've had instances where I've shared that with a colleague
Yeah.
who happened to be representing a foundation and an estate of
Yeah.
someone who was looking to, establish their legacy. It also, it's timing. I've been talking with this person for many years, shared with them an idea for, creating an art center slash museum at a state institution that I was working at. It would have been the first in the whole consortium of state institutions to have its own museum. This idea of we being very dedicated to education and how this would be a vehicle. This is just me saying, but I knew exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
Anyway, fast forward, Eric could tell me more about this. 2 months later, I think that there's someone that I would really love to share this with. 2 months later, Eric, I think that this can be a go, and so then you're going through it, then you're doing the introduction, all of that, and then it turns out to be a $10 million gift and a new art center.
Yeah.
And there you go. That
And I
wasn't
think,
an
yeah,
intention, but that's a relationship that you've cultivated, not for the sake of that gift, although that's a wonderful byproduct, but it's that consistency of communicating, reporting, knowing exactly whether it's someone, if I were working in marketing, programming, collections, we all know what's going on so that you just don't know who you're talking to that might find some interest and then lead to that philanthropic gift that most likely in a legacy will end in a bequeath of some sort that you couldn't have possibly imagined.
and
Yeah,
it sounds like that type of consistency in programming plays a big role in building the trust, I think, in some ways too.
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's great. And what do you think that like what does it look like when content and advancements are truly aligned and working together? Like how do you like is that yeah, so that's a big one there. It's a big nugget, but it's like yeah, I think that plays really well with what I think people are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Ray, and we've both had experience working together and outside, but I think that the relationships that you cultivate within your institution are just as important as those outside, because both of those departments very much are doing the same work, but it's much more potent and effective when they're doing it together. And I think that so in the same way that I describe like these ongoing check-ins, it's not just based on foundation grant deadlines that you meet with advancement or it's this ongoing, I don't know if I'm going to do this, but I want to share with you that I'm thinking about this. Does this align with anything that's going on in your ecosystem right now? And, whether that be for your institution or whether you're nested in a larger institution as we are, I think it's that constant communication where advancement will see, oh, yes, okay, this. And I think from a programming perspective, I often think about what are the opportunities if we create this program, would there be an opportunity? How would that kind of entice engagement from new friends of the museum? How would that entice engagement by certain folks that might represent foundations that are looking, I think I know, thinking broadly, yes, exhibitions are usually our first place, but programming has a tendency, as Ray referenced early on, K through 12. People love to understand how you are meeting the needs of teachers and students. And so that sort of thing. But I think it's these continual conversations, not because they're necessary based on what we all, again, that outcome that we were supposed to have, but because we're brainstorming, we're sharing ideas early that you're doing it in a collaborative way, in an ecosystem that supports all of the other parts of it.
Amazing. I'm sure so useful in this conversation, like for everybody who's on this call here. So, but moving forward to content and operations, and again, this can be open to Ray or to Erica. How do your teams connect programs, engagement data to development strategy in a practical way?
I'll hand that to Ray.
If you want to go to Ray, or
Yeah.
yeah, that's
If
what I was
it's a
about to
data
say. Yeah,
question,
yeah,
Erica,
yeah. I was gonna,
I'm all
yeah.
over it. So I think um, as someone who spent most of their career in fundraising, I have always looked to education and programming, even before curators, although we love our curators, because our programs in education are really how we're interfacing and building audience in person. And I think one example of that is when I was at the Smithsonian, we had this lecture series in the fall. And one was to bring in a critic, the next one was a curator, the next one, was an artist. So it was a great series. And my predecessor had never really attended them, didn't find them particularly useful, but I always made sure to attend so I could see who was coming to it. I knew a few of our, members and donors went, and it was really important to them. It became, a named lecture series for a reason, and it had a reception. So I always attended that reception. Now, can I say I added anything to the program? No. Sadly, I cannot say that. But knowing who is engaged at which program and being able to approach them informally. And the best thing about a reception after a program or just talking to people after a program, you already have a subject to talk about. And I think, especially as a fundraiser, you never want to give the impression that I'm just talking to you because I'm trying to get a gift. Horrible. Nobody wants that. But if you're able to meet people casually, talk about what's happening in the museum, not just that lecture series, but also if I can say, "Oh, we went to this lecture series. Oh, you like this lecture? Well, Erica has this, and this coming up. You should come to those too. If you like this, you'll like that." And you're bringing them in more and having more opportunities to talk to them about what they're actually passionate about. You know, whether that's establishing their legacy, whether that's, one example of a donor that I have is that they paid for buses. They wrote a check for the cost of school buses to come and visit. So any school visit that we had, we would tell them, this is how much this year those buses cost, and they would give a gift for the next year based on that. They wanted kids, school kids, K through 12, to come into the museum, and this was a very tangible way for them to support that. I just think that in fundraising, in any sort of externally facing position, even in visitor services where I started out, being able to communicate what those are so important to bringing people in. And if people aren't in, what is operations doing? We need content really drives
Yes.
all of our activities, our ability to fundraise, our ability to interface at all with the public. We have to have that content. We have to have those things to talk about.
Yeah. So where do you think like institutions may struggle when trying to connect engagement to the revenue side of things?
Yeah, I think engagement to revenue, if you have events that are ticketed, I think it's a little bit easier, right? Because you can say these programs made this amount of money. If you don't ticket, then you're really, if you don't have the data or you aren't sure, if you don't ask for an RSVP list, then it becomes there's a little bit of a breakdown there, right? Because you're just not able to get that data. And so, as someone who looks at the data and would maybe have a vested interest in saying, this is really popular, maybe this one isn't as much, how would I communicate that without numbers to, programming or education, you know? And there are donors who want that information as well, people who would support the museum based on that. And I think from at least the operations perspective and thinking about how we're able to communicate where we see success and where we see opportunity, that's a really key portion of it for me.
Well, and maybe this is a question for Erica. Do you have like a specific example where maybe the content experience led to a meaningful donor relationship? I mean, I know you spoke about that earlier, but I don't know if you have a specific example around that, like that maybe a story you could tell, anecdotal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're talking about is when you talk about revenue, generating revenue from content, I just don't believe it can be motivated by the desire for revenue. Because what you're talking about is a relationship with individuals and trying to get at what it is that they feel passionate about and want to give
Mhm.
to, right? So I think that description of what Ray was talking about with people that you meet at receptions or things like that, it takes a while to find that out. And what I was going to say as Ray was talking and thinking about answering your question is it is a long-term investment.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not, it's not the, you are not going to see the return on investment next year.
Yeah, yeah,
It is the big, you might see this spike. I remember when I was working at the MFA and there was a real investment in, which many museums do want a younger crowd, right? So we started having these late evenings and now those are very, like they happen all the time, right? You see
right.
DJs, you see, but it was this idea of the long term. If we're going to sustain ourselves, we need to broaden our audience. We need to think about younger generations that are going to be the ones, again, in the long term and I think that's what Ray is saying and what I believe too. It's like, what's the long term goal here? What sort of investment are you willing to make in that? That's where the programs are then, okay, everybody, we really want to see more senior citizens here because we know that where we're located, there's, right? And we've also done our research. We've thought about that, right? And I think those are the things that in the long term are what get you or generate that revenue. Because what we're all talking about, I think more so is we love a great big gift. It's great. But if it's only a one-time gift,
Mhm.
we're looking for the next. What is the long-term investment that we as an institution want to make in ourselves? And what's that story that we're sharing with others for them to feel just as excited, invest in us, and we're going to invest in this program because that's what you said you're trying to do. We want to see proof of concept. Oh, that's great. Now we'll pay for buses for the next 10 years because you showed us in the last two that it's increased by 30%. Perfect. That's kind of what I think about in this, but I think we as institutions should be thinking less about the annual fiscal landscape and more about the long term. How are we going to sustain ourselves in the long term? What do we need to invest in? Who do we need to invest in? And who do we need to garner the support for that um, long term goal, if that makes sense.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
And I think right now we're talking a lot about major and principal gifts, right? And those are really part of how a museum grows. But I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that programming, education, et cetera, all of those areas also allow us to find people who could be interested in becoming donors at an annual level. Maybe they're just starting out. As Erica just said, like you're younger, maybe you're just starting out, but you could afford $25 a year to the MFA. Sure, like I really liked that event. It's a way to understand who your audience is and what they want and what they value and get them into that pipeline. Maybe 5 years later, they say, oh, well, I'm making a little bit more money now. I can definitely afford a $75 individual, membership, or, oh, I got married and I'm going to get a dual membership or a family membership.
Mm,
So, engagement builds pipeline. Now,
yeah.
the point of engagement is not necessarily pipeline. Like the museum is trying to obviously serve its mission,
Yeah.
but I think, from revenue and philanthropic pathway generation, you're able to make those two things come together.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance, it sounds like. I mean, in terms of like making sure that it's like the mission is important, but at the same time, kind of playing it out and having a long-term effect is really the ultimate goal between everything. So yeah, that's amazing. Okay, where to start? Let me just make sure I got it. Yeah, where to start? So when teams are truly aligned, what does that look like week to week in terms of like collaboration? And I'll throw it out to either one, whoever wants to start on that question, Ray or Erica.
Sure, I
Yeah,
can
okay,
start.
okay.
Um,
Because I'd like to
I
get
think
both of I'd like to get both opinions. So, Erica, you're not off the hook. You're gonna be asked next. So,
so, I think form follows function, like the creation of any sort of philanthropic pipeline or, revenue pathway has to follow the activities of a museum's, curators, collection, its educators, its programming team. So in order to, oh, I think you went back a slide, David.
sorry. Yep. Go ahead. Keep going. Yep.
So, from week to week, month to month, it is important that we are able to receive that information, but also we have to go after that information. So that's something that, Erica, you alluded to earlier that I lovingly call staff stewardship. That's about your internal connections. So if I know, okay, Erica has her fellowship that's happening, in the summer. I know that she's got other programming happening throughout the year in different locations. Great. I already understand what her calendar, and that is by no means everything that Erica is up to. But for example, I am able then to say, okay, here are some priorities, here are opportunities for donors to engage, etc. I can get feedback for them. And then I can go to Erica and say, hey, is there a need for that? What needs funding? What maybe has an endowment already? What could use an endowment? We all love an endowment. So, I think on a weekly basis, it maybe is like just catching up here and there in the halls, but at least bi-weekly or monthly, there are conversations that have to happen to say, oh, has anything changed? Is there anything I should be aware of? Or I can say, oh, hey, Erica, I was talking to a donor. They got really excited about, this program that's happening in the fall. Do you mind if I, connect you two to have a conversation? And it goes the other way. If Erica has a conversation and she's like, "Hey, this is an advancement question. Can you join me? You're going to have the particulars of this or that. Could you put together a proposal, etc." There really is that back and forth that happens. That has to happen, to that point. It can't happen in a silo. There has to be an understanding that it's all interdependent. We rely on each other, and you could have the best, reporting systems, et cetera, in the world, but I think, it's really about that interpersonal connection that you have with your colleagues, respect for their work, and understanding that without them, you can't do what you need to do, and it goes the other way.
Yeah, I would definitely echo everything that Ray has said. I think, you know, relationships, again, internally are just as important, if not more, than those with our external partners. But I do, and I agree that it's different for different museums based on the nature of the museum, the scale of the museum. But also, I think one thing that comes to mind, and I know many of us that work in museums, we have a lot of meetings. We have so many meetings because we're trying to convey this information to each other. And also to think about, yes, we have those check-in meetings that happen maybe every 2 weeks. We see each other in the hallways, but something consistent. But what we've been thinking about too is what are the other ways? Like, for us, we have a calendar of everything that we do, some sort of like internal document or calendar that is up to date and always reflecting what's going on that people can reference, or an internal website. I mean, it sounds really obvious, but it's surprising how often, just one place where everyone can go. That's part of the structure that we talked about that enables us to do this. So thinking about it in more than one way of exchanging the information, making it accessible, doing share outs, maybe once or twice a year based on, what we do. And I think we know these models exist because we ask our curators to share with us what they're doing, and they're working out, some of them 5-7 years out. So we should be able to give to them that same sort of thing, or be able to respond to their work for the sake of getting that information or those ideas out in enough time, as we had talked about earlier, to be able to act on them, to move on them, so that advancement can do what they need to do, marketing, all of those things. And I think a lot of it is, yes, it's being nimble, and it's different at different places. But also, I think, whether you're dealing with a large museum, then it's more of and I think that was in 100%, what's the one thing we always come to? Who are we really about? Is it about our encyclopedic collection? Okay, then how is that working versus a smaller institution where, and I'll make that, we're a teaching museum. Is that reflected in what we're doing? I think there needs to be, some of us are a little bit more specific about things and use a rubric and all of that to keep on task, but we can do that as an institution, I think, as well.
Fantastic. And then just kind of looking at this slide by itself, what do you think, and I'll start with Ray, what do you think is like the most urgent for museums right now, and then why?
That's a controversial question, David. That one's because they're all,
Well, we wouldn't be doing our
it's all
job right
important.
now. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
It's all important. I would say, from where I've sat, of course, it's being able to define, well, how is this moment of engagement? How is this program? How is this exhibition, et cetera? How is that going to allow me to create a pathway to revenue, a pathway, for philanthropy? Now, I think on the philanthropic side, it's pretty clear. We know that if people have come to 3 events, if the museum sells tickets or requires RSVPs, we're collecting that information. We're trying to see if they'll be members, if they'll give to the annual fund. Do they have potential to be a major donor? Do they represent a foundation? But that said, I think as tempting and as, maybe in an ideal world, everything that everyone did generated revenue or philanthropy. But it would be a disservice to content of any kind if it was restricted in any way to be like, this can only exist if it drives revenue or philanthropy. I think that would completely undermine, the integrity of the institution. So, as much as I have a vested interest in that one, I guess I've also already talked myself out of it a little bit. Sometimes you do that. That's
Yeah.
just what happens.
You know, I mean, I would, from my perspective, I would choose mapping the ecosystem.
Mm.
I feel like, we have a lot, I think we see a lot of examples of leaders right now who, yeah, in order to really be able to think about the direction, how we do it, when we do it. I mean, you truly have to know what your role is in the ecosystem, in the landscape, how you map that out for your institution, but for your staff, so that they have a way of moving through this and creating that sort of alignment and collaborative sort of practice that we've been talking about here. I do think that it requires that kind of work, and in my opinion, I feel like everything else just kind of falls into place.
Amazing. Yeah. So we're at the end of our uh, webinar here, but we do have some questions, and I'll throw it out to both of you before we end. How do we ensure operations is involved early enough in content planning?
Yeah,
Throw
I mean,
another
I
one.
think operations covers a lot of different departments. Of course, they should probably know. If it's going to cost any money, finance will know pretty much immediately. Um, I think it can vary, to Erica's point, on the size of the institution and how many people are available to make something happen very quickly if needed. But I think in terms of curatorial, because those are charted out 5 to 7 years in advance, if you can let us know that when it's been approved, then we can understand who might want to be a part of that journey, who might want to support that show. That would be incredible. From, our perspective in development, we might need to know 4 years in advance. Marketing, maybe they just need to know a year and a half in advance. So I think part of it is understanding that while there are a lot of timelines happening, as they are attached to a specific project, they're going to be a little bit different. We're going to bring people in, at different times. So as early as possible for development, maybe in the middle of the process, you're going to want to bring in education programs and marketing. Towards the end, you better have told everybody or you're going to get in trouble. You're going to make someone mad.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I'm a big proponent of earlier the better, as much
Amazing.
transparency to give people an opportunity to ask the questions they need to do the work they need to do.
Well, Ray, Erica, thank you so much for your time today. I hope everybody got just a nugget out of this. I think that the biggest thing with these webinars is really just kind of get people thinking through the process and understanding. And I know that you both are obviously well versed in building these and really kind of retaining this. And one of the things that I'd like to do is after the webinar today is we'll build out a blog and we'll put it out on social as well. And if there's any other questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out and I'll make sure that it gets to both of you. And we'll see if we can answer those questions in a complete way. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you found the session valuable. As valuable as I did, to be on and also to be on the lookout of our podcast. We do have a podcast that's we try to have on a monthly basis, the Cultural Animals Museum Leadership Lab, where we speak to leaders, museum leaders about the real business operations, marketing, and development challenges facing museums today. We'll also be hosting continued webinars that we'll be sharing ongoing through vivart.com. And again, as a reminder, we will send out this webinar shortly to those who registered. And thank you again for joining us. I appreciate everybody's time and look forward to the next one. Thank you, Erica and Ray. Thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.